Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY, and on today's episode we are going to be tackling a few little things that are going to make a huge difference in the drivability and operability of my Classic Mini. So, you won't want to miss it. All right, hey everybody. It has been a little while since I have given you guys a Classic Mini update. We've done stuff on the teardrop trailer, on the Tacoma, but today's episode is about tackling a few little things that I have experienced, learned, and know that I need to fix on the Bad Wolf build to help it run a little bit better and to address some little electrical issues and things like that. So, on today's episode, we're going to be tackling those. I'm going to show you guys kind of how things have been coming along with the car and just give you guys a general update. All right, now before we get started on today's episode and swapping out all those sensors and everything, I want to take a minute to talk to you guys about my channel sponsor today. Today's sponsor is a wonderful company called Aura. Now, I know that you guys have become aware of the cybersecurity issues that have started facing pretty much everybody in the world as technology has begun to take over most parts of our lives. And as someone who works in the technology sector, specifically building full stack applications that require a heavy level of security, it's at top of mind in just about everything I do on my computer. And today's sponsor, Aura, is a security platform that takes a whole life approach and is built to be your companion in the digital world, helping you to monitor your personal information to make sure that it isn't sold and exposed in data breaches. And when it is exposed in those situations, they help you remove that data from data brokers where possible, and help you to mitigate and address any security issues that might come up after your data is exposed. In addition to that, they have a whole platform of tools which utilize some of the newest Gen AI technologies in helping you to block spam that comes to your phone. They have a VPN platform to protect yourself when you're browsing the internet. I know that you guys know what VPNs are. Parental controls, transaction managers, and a password manager. When I say that Aura is the whole package, I truly mean that. And as you guys know, I am very picky about the channel sponsorships that I do on Classic Mini DIY. This is an independent channel, so the companies that I work with are a direct reflection of the things that are important to me, but also things that I wouldn't suggest unless I used myself. Now, I have been using Aura for a little over 6 months. But what's really special about Aura to me is that I actually have friends who work on this platform and who help build the security features that you guys use and that I myself use when I use this every day. And today I'm really excited to be able to share that I have partnered with them and I am providing a special 2-week free trial to sign up for Aura. There's no risk, no obligation, but I think that once you guys sign up for it, give it a shot, you're going to find that it is really, really cool and something that you'll probably want to keep around for a long time. What's especially cool about it is they do have family plans. So if maybe one of you in the family is the tech savvy one, but you have some additional family members who maybe are less tech savvy or more prone to getting into security situations, you can set this stuff up for them and share one account so that you can help facilitate their digital security while also monitoring and making sure that things don't happen to these people, or perhaps you have kids and you need to set up some parental controls, which are especially important in the digital age. Now, if you guys are interested in signing up for this, I have a special link which should be popping up on the screen. It probably already did a little bit ago, and I have that link down in my description below. That is a special introductory price and a free 2-week trial to give it a shot, try it out, see all of the awesome features, and see why you might want to keep this in the future. Now, I do want to say a huge thank you to Aura. They have decided to partner with Classic Mini DIY, so I am going to be sharing this on some of my upcoming videos as well. This isn't the last you're going to hear of Aura. So with that, let's jump back to the video. So for those of you who might be new to this build or new to the channel, what we're working on today is my 1960 Morris Mini. And I have done a huge build on this. I've gone to fuel injection, drive-by-wire, I've turbocharged the engine, all with really cool, excellent parts from a variety of companies, not limited to Bag Sport, and of course my drive-by-wire throttle body is something I make and produce myself. So what are we doing on today's episode? Well, we are going to be tackling a few little electrical things. One thing I have noticed is that the injectors that I've purchased, although they were sold as genuine Siemens injectors, I don't think that they are genuine. They haven't been behaving like genuine injectors, and I can't quite get the injector dead times just right. So what I did is I ordered a set of known genuine injectors from a company called Speeding Parts. That is I think that they are based actually in Sweden. But I've got my brand new injectors here. These are still 60-pound injectors. They use a different connector type than the ones that are on the car now, so I will have to repin this, but I'm hoping that with these I will be able to get more reliable behavior out of my injectors and get more reliable fueling as a result. Now, the other thing that I want to tackle today is related to the oiling system. Now, you can't see it from here because I've been really picky about how I wired and hid every sensor and wire and everything, but what I have down here is a dual oil pressure and oil temperature gauge. Now, the oil pressure part of that gauge has been working flawlessly, but the oil temperature portion, the resistance range that the sensor uses is so small that the ECU is just absolutely unhappy with the signal that's coming through. So I've never been able to get a reliable reading on my oil temperature. So what I'm going to be replacing those with is two individual sensors. Both of these are Rife sensors, that's R-I-F-E. They are modern sensors, so they're going to have a really great scaling. So when I plug them in, I have the exact scaling information. I can get really, really reliable and fast readings, which for oil pressure is extremely important. Oil temperature is a nice to have piece, but we do have to do a few adjustments in order to get those in, which means taking out the intercooler, taking off this filter, probably removing the grill, and I think that'll get us to where we need to be. So first things first, let's do the injectors at the top because they're just right there, easy to swap out, just 2 bolts, pop them in and out. So now we are in the thick of all of the wires, and obviously you can see a lot of this stuff is hidden normally when we have the intercooler up here, but it's a good opportunity for me to show you guys what's going on down here. One, we have our boost controller. This is an electronic solenoid valve, and this is managing wastegate pressure so that I can control exactly how much boost I'm going to be getting at any given time. Then over here, we have our knock sensor. And right here is the sensor that we're going to be replacing today. This is the combination oil pressure and oil temp sensor that is not quite performing the way I need it to. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to be replacing this with some RIFE sensors. So we have sensor number 1 here, which is the oil pressure. That goes up to 100 psi, which is perfect. If we have over 100 psi, it's going to be an issue anyways. And it uses an awesome DTM 3-pin connector here. Really happy about that. Second is the accompanying oil temp sensor. Same setup, very tiny, very compact. And this is going to get wired in as well so we can get an accurate oil temperature. Now the way I'm going to be doing this, because as you can see here, this takeoff has the takeoff from my turbo oil feed and then a side takeoff for my oil pressure sensor gauge here. This is going to come out. I'm going to put the new pressure sensor in there, and then I'm going to disconnect the bottom end of this oil return that goes through the filter, and I'm going to put this inline adapter in there. This is going to allow me to directly pipe in the oil pressure, the oil temp sensor, and get a really nice clear picture of what the oil temperature is as it's returning to the block, which should be its hottest point. So this will be coming out of the engine down into the filter, and that's where it goes prior to getting oil cooled. The filter itself has a thermostatic switch in there that'll allow it to open up to the oil cooler when it gets too hot, but this will get that temperature before it goes to the oil cooler, which is where I think is the most valuable because it'd be at its hottest. So anyways, to get all of this out, first thing we need to do is what we have here is our original harness that I set up. This goes to the sensor. That kind of came undone, we can see here. And then these are all of the connectors coming from my harness. I think I'll actually separate this wire, separate this part of the harness, and either extend these wires to their new connectors. Not sure how far it'll reach. We'll have to see if it actually reaches the old if it actually reaches the new sensors. So, gonna unplug that and get to it. All right, so now we've got all those sensors installed. The next step is to, of course, scale those sensors in the ECU software and test to make sure that they're working. So let me show you guys what this looks like on the computer. All right, so now taking a look at the map itself, this is where you are going to set up your sensor scaling. Obviously, this is where you configure everything about the map, but specifically when you add new sensors, change out any sort of injector, anything electronic that's going into an input or via an output, it usually needs to be scaled so the ECU knows how to handle the signal that's coming out of that sensor. So let me show you how I do that. In the search window up here in the Haltech NSP software, the easiest way to find stuff I find is by just typing it into that search. So in our case, we've got 2 oil pressure and oil sensors that we need to configure. So I went ahead and typed the word oil, and you can see the oil pressure sensor I have already enabled here. And you can even go down, select the wiring for it. You can see how everything's configured. For the oil pressure sensor, pull-up is not required. This is something that actually pulls voltage up for the analog voltage input. I won't get too deep into that, but not required for this sensor. There are some diagnostic options if we want to have these. As you can see here, I have some safeties, operating minimums here for my DTC, which is a engine code to fire. I set my oil pressure minimums here. This is in kPa absolute, but let's swap that unit here to make it a little bit easier. I'm going to swap this to Celsius and swap this to PSI. So that'll swap that out. You can see at 500 RPM, 10 PSI is my minimum, 1000, 10 psi is also my minimum. Just so you guys are aware, this setting is actually what it is in the factory switch that determines when your oil pressure light comes on. So if BMC thought 10 psi was good enough for the engine, it's good enough for me as well. And then you can see I've got some kind of limitations here. So at like 6,000 RPM, if I don't have at least 35 psi of oil pressure, there's a big issue. So just some kind of diagnostic information for you guys. But jumping over to the sensor scaling, you can see here we've got this nice little graph, and we have a comparison here between volts and psi. Now, when you buy a sensor, if you purchase a good, reliable sensor like the Rife sensors I bought, they'll come with the scaling information right out of the box, and then you'll be able to plug this in directly to your ECU. Now, depending on your ECU, you may be able to have more than 8 cells, less than 8 cells. All of these are configured a little bit differently, but there should be some instructional information. For my case, I have 8 cells for oil pressure, and so I took the actual scaling information from Rife, parsed it directly into this little spreadsheet here. Now, same way I did this here, we go over the the oil temperature sensor, and this one looks a little bit different. Conceptually though, it's the same. So wiring, this one does in fact require pull-up based on the way that I have it wired, and we have some diagnostics here if we want to add some operating maximums, which in fact, I think I'm gonna go ahead and add that. If I see an oil temperature over, let's do 100 degrees Celsius, I think I will do a level 1 DTC severity fault. So that's going to tell me if my temperature goes over 100 degrees, I'm going to get a little DTC light on my dash. Oil minimum, I'm not going to leave that. Really probably won't deal with that too much here in North Carolina. And then we hop over to the sensor scaling. Now this one is underneath the hood, it's a resistance style sensor. And so as the temperature increases, if I remember correctly, the temperature increases, if the temperature decreases, the resistance goes down, which means more voltage is measured. I think I have that correct. That might be wrong though. Essentially though, this scaling information again came directly from Rife, and I pass this in. I mark each voltage station. You can see each one of these corresponds to a different voltage, all the way up to 5 volts, which is what these sensors operate at, and then the temperature that corresponds to that voltage. So you can see 97 is about 2.19 volts, whereas if you're at 143 degrees, you are looking at, essentially no voltage. So that's a little bit how these sensors work. It's kind of like a too long didn't read. But now that we have this out of the way, let's jump back out to the garage, and I'm going to start this up and I'm going to test these sensors to make sure that they work. All right, and so you could see there, the oil pressure went straight up. Very happy with that. Started measuring and getting a good accurate reading on that. The oil temperature, we didn't let the car run long enough, so it didn't really change in temperature, but I do want to go for a drive and see how that will actually perform. One thing I did like to hear is how well the car was idling, even though it was pretty rich. With the new injectors, I think the new dead times are already looking pretty good. We'll know for sure once we get out on the road and give it a go. So that's the next step. Let's go for a drive. All right, so for this next part, we need to test those new sensors. Now, I know the engine was making oil pressure prior to swapping out those sensors, so I'm not really worried about whether or not it is making pressure, but I do need to verify that I am getting that oil pressure reading, and so I have my laptop just out of screen behind us here with my diagnostic information, and then I also have my gauge here scaled to read the oil pressure. So we're going to compare the oil pressure that's on the computer and compare it to what I'm seeing on this gauge. And then, in addition to that, I would like to verify that my oil temperature gauge is getting a good reading. Now, I won't know for sure if the temperature is exactly right, but if I am seeing a reasonable temperature, given that I was provided the exact scaling instructions from Rife Sensors, I can kind of, determine that that is working the way it should be. So, anyways, let's start the car up. I'm going to pull it out into the driveway, let it warm up, and then I'll bring you guys for a spin and you can kind of see how the car behaves. Alright, so I don't know how loud it is, but hopefully it's not too bad. The car does seem to be idling a little bit lower than it was before, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. That'll remain to be seen. But I am seeing solid oil pressure, coolant temp sensors working, and oil temp is going up, which I would expect it to be doing. So at the moment, I think things are good. Now let's give this an opportunity for it to get up to operating temperature. Alright, so I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a primer here. This next portion is going to be under load, heavy boost, and to give you guys an idea of what it's like to drive a real boosted Mini. So, very happy with the coolant temps. Oil temp is only 64 Celsius right now. Inlet air is 39 Celsius. Coolant temp is 82 Celsius. And the car is running exceptionally well. The injectors work so much better. And I honestly can't express to you guys how happy I am with the performance of this vehicle. Okay, so I'm going to pull over for just a minute and give you guys a little bit of an assessment. So the car is running exceptionally well. The new injectors, a little bit of a tweak with my clutch switch sensor. This is going to tell the ECU when I have the clutch in. I'll show you guys some of that when I get back. But the new oil pressure and oil temp sensors, everything's running perfectly now. I'm genuinely over the moon with the performance. So we've done some heavy load spins here, and taking a look at all of my numbers, we've got about 90 degrees Celsius on the coolant temp sensor, We've got a 42 degrees Celsius on the inlet air. Oil pressure is sitting a little bit above 18 psi at idle, which is perfectly fine. Oil temp is 81 degrees Celsius. So I am seeing a definite correlation between the heat of the oil and the viscosity going down or going up. I can't remember that. But overall, everything's working the way it should. We got up to about 12 psi on those runs, and it's so fun, you guys. It's just such a fun car. We're gonna do one more spin, and then I'm gonna go get some gasoline because I am nearly out. So fun. Yes. Amazing. All right, so that is a little taste of what it's like driving a real turbocharged Mini. And let me tell you guys, it is so much fun. And you can build these turbo Minis in so many different ways to make it fit exactly your driving style. To give you guys a little synopsis on how everything went, our coolant temperatures were excellent, never went over 95 degrees, and that's 95 degrees Celsius. And to give you an idea of how hot it is here in Charlotte right now, outside it was about 34 degrees Celsius, very humid. So it was a hot day here, and the car stayed nice and temperate, and really no coolant issues, which is great. Oil pressure was excellent. Under load, I saw 65 to 70 psi, and then dropping down to around 15 to 20 at hot idle, which is pretty standard for the 20-50 VR1 oil. It does seem to get a little thinner once it gets hotter, and with our new oil temperature sensor, we were able to measure that temperature, which was really cool. The hottest the oil ever got was about 80 degrees Celsius. The thermostat that opens up the oil cooler doesn't come on until I think 92 degrees Celsius, but it does also always have a little bit of that thermostatic switch open. So there is oil flowing through the cooler, it's just not full flow, and that prevents a surge situation, which would reduce the oil pressure really quickly. Definitely don't want that to happen. But I'm happy with those oil pressures. That's really normal for a classic Mini, and great for a Mini that also has a turbo in its oil circuit and a whole external oil cooler setup. So very pleased with that. Now, fueling wise, the new injectors were working perfectly. I'm very, very happy that I swapped those out. On the flip side of that, though, I am seeing a little overfueling in a few different cells of my map, so I'm definitely going to have to do some tweaking and adjusting of those cells, which shouldn't be too difficult. It is the beauty of fuel injection. You have definitive control over every aspect of the fueling at every load and RPM range, as well as volumetric efficiency. All of these things really cool. It sounds really complicated, but at the end of the day, it's really just what amount of fuel are you passing in at any given load. But this is kind of what I was talking about in my last episode about turbo minis. You really want to build them right from the beginning, build the engine to support boost, but also doing things right the first time allows you for a reliable build. So having the electronic boost controller as an example allows me to run a suitably sized turbo for the 1275. The GBC20 really is like the perfect size for a 1275. I had a GT17 before, which was also pretty spot on. Anything smaller than that, you're really not getting much out of the turbo. And anything bigger than that, you're trading low-end power for those top-end gains. And you're going for really peak power. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a trade-off. But for the setup with the boost controller and my speed sensor, what it gives you the ability to do is have fine-tooth control over when the boost comes in your map. So that was a lot of information. Sorry about that. Went down a little bit of a tangent. But if you guys have any questions about this episode or anything I talked about in this episode, post it in the comment section. I really love talking about this stuff, and I'm happy to answer any questions I can for you guys. Honestly, I'm just so over the moon with this car. I love it. And like, what an excellent conclusion to the life of Bad Wolf Mini. So anyways, thank you guys so much for joining today. And I think I'm going to wrap it up with that one. You guys know the drill. Till I see you again, enjoy those minis and motor on. See ya.